This is the Data Slice, hosted by the Data Science Alliance. It's where we sit down to talk all things data science, AI, and tech, any way you slice it.
I'm Callan Hobman, and joining us on the podcast today is a longtime friend of DSA. This is Rakesh Senthilvelan. He's a deployment strategist at Peregrine, but I know you at one point were a DSA intern, and now you're part of our working group and very involved with DSA, doing all sorts of cool things in the industry. So excited to have you talk about your experience and data ethics and all sorts of things today. But first off, how you doing? I know you flew in. He doesn't actually live in San Diego anymore, so he flew in just for us and other things. But how are you doing? How's it feel to be back at DSA?
Doing great. Happy to be here. And yeah, I just always like remember how much I miss San Diego. Every time I come back, I'm like, man, I wish I still lived here, but happy to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, glad to have you back, at least for the weekend. And we appreciate you letting us bring you onto the podcast because you have been just so involved with DSA as a working group, volunteering your time on different projects and things like that. I was thinking for people who might not know you outside of DSA, could you tell us a little more about your path, from college and your experiences here with DSA and kind of beyond and what led you to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So for starters, so I did go to college at UCSD. So there I was one of the first cohorts to do the data science major over there. And so I started in 2018 at UCSD. And then, moving on from there, I came across DSA, I believe, sometime my junior year in college. So a friend of mine at the time started working for DSA. And so they were like, hey, this is like a cool organization that had just started at the time. I think like 2021 was like the initial day. And so I was like, hey, I'll come by, like I'll help out a bit, see what's going on. And then as I got more and more involved, I was like, this is actually like a really interesting organization. And then I interned here for about a quarter at UCSD during my senior year. So that was kind of my initial path into DSA. And then from there, I went on to be a data scientist at Booz Allen Hamilton for about 2.5 years. And now I'm a deployment strategist at Peregrine. So that's kind of like the bird's eye view of my path so far.
The big picture.
The big picture, yeah.
Could you talk a little more about, I know I said your title, deployment strategist. Could you
Mhm.
talk a little more about what that really looks like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So deployment strategist is an implementations based role. And so a lot of what we do is with Peregrine, it's a data integration platform. So it's basically bringing in a lot of important data sources together for an end user and kind of enabling that for them. So I think like at a high level, that might sound like somewhat like, okay, you just like put your data in and it does stuff. But in order to do that stuff, you need someone like me going in and kind of working on kind of understanding how the data works, how these different sources connect with one another, how we can kind of integrate the data in a way that makes it like most usable for the end user. So a lot of that kind of like data engineering, that technical support, working on some of the data science aspects, enabling AI, whatever else it is that we can do within the Peregrine platform comes down to me and our team of DSs to kind of work through.
How is it different from the work you did at Booz Allen?
Yeah, so I think like the main differentiator here is like rather than being, like a data scientist per se, like at Booz Allen is very much like more of a traditional data scientist, where I was working on data science problems, working on like AI, data engineering, etc. In more of like a services capacity. So like the customer comes to us with a, contract saying we need this type of service completed and we would do it. With Peregrine, it's more so that we're doing it with a product. And so rather than necessarily like having more of an open-ended slate, we're like working with the product of Peregrine and then delivering that to an end user. So that's kind of the main differentiator between the two, and also like a lot more travel, honestly. So that's pretty cool. So yeah,
I was gonna say, is that a good thing for you? You like that?
I love it. Yeah,
Travel's good.
yeah, get to see the country.
That's
So yeah.
awesome. Yeah. And obviously you have done lots of work with DSA Stel in our working group. What is it like for you to now, officially be in your career and kind of see how both your education at UCSD and internships and things like that have kind of led you to where you are now in, a true professional career?
Yeah, I mean, I think like it's one of those things where the time kind of like flies by and you're like not even like really cognizant of like all the changes that are happening in your life until you like look back in it in like retrospect. So it's like I think like between when I was with DSA first, like as a junior, senior in college, and now I think like along the way I was like, oh, not a whole lot's changed. Like, oh, I got like a new job, like whatever, like I graduated college, stuff like that. But then like looking back, I'm like, man, there is like so much that has changed. I think obviously like scope of responsibility like skyrockets. Like when you go into like the real world, not real world, like into like a full-time work setting,
Hmm.
I think like your scope of responsibility obviously changes. Like you're responsible for more things, sometimes more people. And so I think that's like the biggest shift. It's a big shift in accountability. If I mess something up as an intern, like when I was like interning at Cisco or whatever, and I like pushed bad code by accident, it's like, okay, like, learning lesson, whatever. But now it's like obviously that has far more ramifications when you're working with like end users and customers. And so I think that kind of sense of accountability is kind of the big shift that's happened. And then also I'd say just, going to a company like Peregrine where it's like a fast-paced startup, I think that too comes with its set of like, holding yourself accountable for kind of what you're doing and also like focusing on like constantly just like staying on the gas pedal, not letting off. I think that's like a big shift that I've noticed throughout my career is just like constantly striving towards like further betterment of yourself and like further advancement of what you're working on and also just like yourself as a person.
Yeah. Yeah, what has that been like kind of being in the startup type environment, having previously also worked in not so much startup?
Yeah, I mean it's been fun, I'd say, though like definitely like a lot of work for sure. But I think like it's really interesting in the sense that like it's cool to be on the ground floor, like, an earlier stage of something that is like has so much potential and is just kind of like something that you are actively working on building. I think that's like been super interesting to me because I have like so much more like emotional buy-in, I feel like now to kind of the work that I'm doing. And so I think that's been like super interesting to kind of be a part of. And like, being with like a team of people who are like equally like-minded has also been super great. And I think, it's just been like a very enjoyable experience, though definitely a lot more caffeine entering my system for sure. But
That's
yeah.
fair. Do you have advice for maybe students or just, people in the industry who maybe are also shifting towards the startup type environment? Do you have advice for maybe getting started with startups?
It's a good question. I think like obviously like every startup's going to be different. So I think it's a matter of like I think the biggest piece of advice I'd give is like go for something that you're personally interested in. I think like I've met a lot of like students and people who have been like I just want to go to a startup and I think like that's like a very like that's just like saying I want to go to a company at the end of the day, right? It's just like a different stage, right?
Mhm.
And so with stars, I think like if you have like a personal buy-in to kind of like the mission of the company and what they do and like a personal interest in it, I think that goes a long way in like, first of all, making you, if you're like a candidate for a role or whatnot, making you more appealing in that sense, but also just like for you personally, like you'll feel so much more fulfillment, I feel like, when you go that route. And so I'd say like look for like don't just um, you know, look for like just startups because you're like, oh, I want to work on a startup. It'll be so cool. Like look for stuff that you're like truly interested in and go from there. Then you can start whittling down like, hey, these are like the specific companies, like maybe these are like the specific locations I want to work in, like different series funding rounds, stuff like that.
It's probably good advice for any industry,
Yeah,
honestly.
fair.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
fair. Yeah.
I know you briefly talked about the work you're doing. Is there a difference in how much you use data versus AI in your role? Is it pretty data heavy or does AI tie into it too?
Yeah, I'd say like my specific role is very data heavy. With a lot of the agencies and like groups that I work with, like it's a lot of just like they have a lot of data and they don't quite like have it in a way that is like usable on an end form. So a lot of what we do is like a lot of that data wrangling, engineering, cleaning, getting it ready for usage. And then on the customer side, like with a lot of our customers, we're seeing them like really enjoy using some of our AI capabilities. So for example, like a lot of our customers utilize written reports. So say for example, you have like a specific case and you have like 10 reports aligned to that case, each one's like 5 pages long. That can be pretty like annoying to go through at times if you just need to read like all 50 pages or something.
Hmm.
One of the things that we offer in Peregrine is ways of kind of summarizing these reports and then linking back to where it got the summary from. So rather than it just kind of like making stuff up, you have more confidence in what the summary that the AI is giving you is because it'll give you quotes and like a way to like click into that quote and see where it came from in the report to give you like some key points from that. And then once you get that, if you want to investigate further, the reports are there for your reading, but like if you just need a quick snapshot of something, it's there for you. So in a lot of those cases, we've found that it greatly reduces the time and kind of effort needed to do some of these tasks from our end users in a way that, they really like using.
Have you seen those tools kind of change and grow over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like especially with like LLMs, I know like that's been like the hot topic for like the past like 2.5 years. I think, when I first started at UCSD, they were like not, at least from like the consumer side of things, like not huge. I know like I was experimenting a bit with like GPT-2 and stuff back then to like there's a project I did where we were taking in like historical speeches of presidents and then seeing like can we replicate like a president's like speech style based off of like a certain topic we give it or like a certain like starting sentence.
Interesting.
And that was like something we did in like 2019 or 20. I want to say with like GPT-2. And back then it was like not fantastic. It didn't work super great. But now it's like now you just have like a website and you just type in a prompt and it just gives you everything. Like before, like we'd have to be like running like, APIs, like this is all like coded stuff. It wasn't like super intuitive to use. Now it's like anybody with an iPhone can do it. So I
Yeah.
think like that's kind of like the biggest shift. And I think like that's obviously like a very, clear industry space. But yeah, even in like the workspace, I think like just like the usage of AI as like a supplementary tool has greatly increased. I think before, like, especially when I was interning and stuff, it was a lot of just like going to like websites and looking up how people did like their code and like copying and like seeing like what do I do to fix it. Now it's like if I have like faulty code and I'm just like here's my code, here's the error it's giving me, like help, it'll be able to at least like help you iterate even though it might not necessarily get it correct. It'll point you in the right direction to where I'm like, oh, okay, now I see like what's actually the issue here, and then I can go in and fix it. So in terms of just like improving my productivity and increasing like the speed of work, it's definitely helped a lot in that end. And it's like that's like probably one of the bigger advancements I've seen of AI's usage in, the workplace.
Do you have advice for people when it comes to kind of sounds like you almost need to stay flexible in a way, as these
Yeah.
tools are growing and improving and changing. So do you have thoughts or advice on how to kind of stay up to date on the latest tools and not kind of, get stuck on one certain one since there seems to always be a new one around the corner?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, like I have, and this is, I don't know how replicable this is, but I'm sure like with time it can happen. So I have like a lot of friends and like, mentors and such who are in this space. And so naturally, I think like I'll just connect with them on LinkedIn and we'll be like, following each other and whatnot. And then every time I see updates from like my friends who work at like Anthropic or whatever, or like they're just liking stuff, reposting things, I think like that naturally builds like kind of a network of like getting information soon. Like if there's a new product release or like someone's written a white paper or whatever, that like comes like up pretty quickly for me. And then on top of that, like I think just having a natural curiosity about these things certainly helps if you're just like looking up stuff, like if you're like trying to solve a problem and you're like maybe I should try like a different way of solving this problem that's because my current method is not working. I think these kind of natural like progressions will help you stay up to date. And then beyond that, I mean like just staying like up to date with like tech news. Like I like to read Hacker News, which is like Y Combinator's news aggregator. And that keeps me up to date with like new tech advances, like new companies that are, getting YC funding, stuff like that,
Hmm.
little things like that tend to help.
Yeah, definitely. Just kind of staying up to date.
Yeah, staying up to date.
I know you mentioned earlier privacy when you were talking about the work that you do and how that's something really important for
Mhm.
your work. Could you talk a little more about, kind of the ethics side of things for your job? Or it sounds like privacy is one, or are there certain kind of values that your team really kind of keeps in mind?
100%. And I think like this is kind of applied like throughout my entire career. I've primarily worked in highly regulated spaces. So before with Booz Allen, like my customers were naval, and
Mm.
now they tend to be more public safety agencies. And so there's always like strong regulation there. And so as a result, like it's super important to maintain the privacy of these companies. So like that usually tends to mean like obviously don't like feed PII into like open LLMs and stuff like that. But also like when it comes to like deploying some of these like solutions to end users, there's also like a lot of consideration that comes into play there too, right? So for example, like with those AI kind of summaries that I was mentioning to you earlier, that takes into account like some of these like reports and stuff that people are writing, which could be like, private information, like you'll have PII, stuff like that. And so we ensure that like those types of algorithms are maintaining like the compliance standards of our end users. And so that's like a huge thing. And then obviously, like based off of what their desires are for how they want their data to be handled, you have to respect that. I think, like it's very easy to not do that. But, that's like kind of like just the baseline, like you have to at least like, maintain those privacy standards. And I think beyond that, it's just a matter of, being careful about how you are just talking about it as well. I think like in a lot of cases now that I live in like the San Francisco Bay Area, it's very easy to like just overhear conversations and like on the train to work or like in coffee shops and stuff like that. And it's just like, maintaining like that level of like kind of like operational security, like when you're just out and about is huge as well.
Mm.
One of my friends was telling me that like, a lot of the work that he does is like very, private. And so like he'll keep like a privacy screen on his laptop if he's working in public. Little things like that kind of go a long way in terms of like maintaining privacy standards because it's not just like the code that you're working with, it's also like the conduct that you have outside of that related to your work.
That's an interesting point. I don't know if people always think about that. It just, it's kind of a personal thing in a
Hmm.
way too. It's not just your work, but personal actions, like at
Yeah.
a coffee shop or something like that.
Yeah.
Interesting. Have there been challenges to that, whether it's maybe you in your personal life or, on your team? Have there been challenges when it comes to upholding privacy?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to this like on myself personally, but like I think when you think about like maintaining privacy and like security standards, that's not always super hand in hand with like the quickest route to something.
Mhm.
And I think like that's obviously like one of like the bigger kind of debates like in this space is just like where's that trade-off between like rapid advancement and like maintaining standards. And I think, like obviously the challenge is that I could just start dumping PII into whatever and just like let it do its thing. But that's like obviously not, the right thing to do. And so naturally, like, the challenges come with like sometimes there's just like deadlines and sometimes it's just like you have to like temper expectations and be like, listen, like we need to maintain our standards. And so this is why like this might take a little longer and stuff like that. So I think a lot of it comes down to just like that. And then also just like I mentioned, like, the coffee shops, etc. It's like sometimes like you just naturally don't even think about some of the things that you're doing. It's just like you're just talking or you're just like, putting something into ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. It's just like these are things where it's like you need to kind of be a bit more like, on your A game about, not potentially leaking sensitive stuff. Yeah.
Definitely. Are there DSA, how we define responsible data science includes pillars, which I know you're familiar
Yeah.
with because you've helped us with
Yeah.
our framework and things like that, which is includes privacy. There's also transparency, fairness, veracity. Do any of those other kind of concepts pop up a lot for you in your work?
I'd say they all do at a certain extent. I think like it's just a matter of like which ones take not priority per se, but just like, come to the forefront in these conversations. So for example, like transparency, I know you mentioned is like a huge one. So like a lot of the steps that I take with like my personal customers is like ensuring that they understand at least at a high level like how things work on the back end and like kind of
Mm.
how our workflows go. Because I think like sometimes it's very easy for them to just like open something and just be like, okay, this is like the end result, but it's also like what goes on in the background. I think like some people are obviously a bit more like, yeah, like let's go, like let's use the most advanced stuff. Others are like a lot more skeptical of it. And so I think like I always will play it to the, like I'll play it to be more transparent. So like for example, when I'm like explaining like, hey, we've rolled out these, AI capabilities for you, I'll also make sure to like explain to them like, at a high level how they work, how they maintain compliance, stuff like that. I've like always done this both at Buzan and at Peregrine, but that's like a huge part of it is just like, following those pillars. I think sometimes they're a little more subtle. And then other times it's like a lot more like you just need to like talk about it and have those conversations. And so, yeah, I mean, they all apply. It's just a matter of like how you engage with them can be different from case to case.
Have there been conversations, whether it's maybe with coworkers or just people you know in the industry? Have you seen a lot of conversations around these kind of ethical considerations that need to be made? Have you seen a lot of those conversations kind of grow as things keep evolving?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like, just like throughout my working years, I think like as these tools become more powerful and like more, I don't want to say hard to escape, but just like they're just more at the forefront of things.
Mhm.
Yeah, the conversations like obviously increase, right? Like along with like the improvement of these technologies, along with like the increase in scale of these companies, people are always like asking like, how safe are these technologies really? Like, what are the conversations we need to be having? They'll be like wondering, is there potential for like this information to leak out? Is there anything we can do where it's like are there more safe versions of these technologies that we can use so that maybe we can like maintain some of that like speed while still maintaining compliance and stuff like that. There's always these types of conversations that are going on. And so yeah, that's kind of like what it's at. I think it's like as the tech increases and as these companies scale, the conversations increase. And it's like stuff that we're, now having these conversations with like non-technical users as well. I think like earlier on in the day, like, they'd just be like AI was kind of a blanket term, but now I have customers like asking specifically about like, oh, like, are like, how are you using these specific like LLMs and stuff like that. And it's like, now it's like more people are aware of them. And so the conversations you're having, kind of you'll need to like scale them a bit more between like technical and non-technical users.
Definitely. Yeah, it's becoming such more of a just a known thing to some extent.
Mhm.
When it comes to being a consumer, maybe a customer for a company like yours, or even just, someone doing anything using ChatGPT on their phone,
Mhm.
are there steps you think on that side of things people can take to ensure it's kind of being used responsibly?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, like, I think kind of we've touched upon a lot of the points about like obviously like not putting in very like, sensitive information from the start. But I think also like when it comes to using it from like a business perspective, like making sure that you're respecting like things like copyrights and stuff like that. Like I'm a huge proponent of kind of, ensuring that like for example if you're using this tech for like art and stuff like that, like I think like that's an area where it's like maybe like there should be more done in terms of like maintaining the styles and like kind of original work of like artists and stuff like that. And so like, for me personally, like as a consumer, like I don't usually use AI for like generating art in the style of something else. Like little things like that I think are kind of like maybe more personal to me. But regardless, like I think like a lot of it comes down to your own personal like ethical code and stuff like that. Like try to follow that to an extent and then, obviously, refrain from like putting in super sensitive information as well.
Talking about AI and kind of policies and regulation, that's obviously kind of a hot topic these days and
Mm.
kind of always. Is there a certain direction that you kind of see that going or maybe hope to see it go?
It's a great question. In terms of like where I see it going and where I hope to see it go, I think, or maybe not the same.
Yeah.
I would say like it's hard to get a beat on policy just because, there's like I mentioned earlier, there's that kind of point of trying to determine like where is the point between, like driving maximum efficiency and maximum like advancement versus maintaining privacy standards, maintaining ethics and et cetera. And I think like that's all a bit up in the air. I think like that's maybe a bit above my like pay grade in terms of like knowing the answer to that question.
It's a
But
loaded question.
yeah, but in terms of like my personal like take on it, I think like I would like to see more of a push for like the maintenance of like like privacy standards. Like I think like seeing like how the EU is handling some of these things is like a good model for kind of how we can maybe approach in the US. And then also maintaining, like I mentioned, like some of these like copyrights and stuff like that. So, not making it so easy for like AI to just train on like literally everything and then be like, oh, if I want to, make a picture in the style of like a Studio Ghibli movie or something, like just pop that out. Like I think like stuff like that should be more well respected. But yeah, I unfortunately don't have like a great answer for you on like the where I see it going, but that's just like me personally how I view these things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and that I mean that's a great example that was really popular on social media a month or two ago.
Yeah.
The recreating art and all of
Yeah.
that and there are all sorts of perspectives on it, but
Yeah.
that's a popular one too. We have
Mhm.
another data slice episode on it actually. Well, when it comes to your team and your work, I know I mentioned the DSA framework that we've created that you've helped us with and things like that too. Are there certain frameworks that your team follows, or maybe just you personally, that you think are kind of good almost steps to take when it comes to all of these different ethical values?
It's a great question. There's no framework I'd say that like is explicitly followed. That being said, I think like with a lot of the work we do, it'll fall into under like compliance like kind of guidelines like CGIS or HIPAA, where it's like, that at a baseline will set like some expectations on like what not to do. And I'd say if you are bound to those like kind of compliances, then you are like I would say getting most of the way there. I think a lot of this stuff, like you mentioned with the DSA framework, comes down to like kind of what you should do. But in terms of like actively just like doing bad stuff, I think like those kind of frameworks will kind of lock you out from doing a lot of it, I'd say. And then from there, it's just a matter of like your personal code. So for me, for like I mentioned, like I'll follow like the DSA framework in terms of like maintaining transparency with people, like ensuring that like, they're fully informed on kind of what's going on and like how we're using AI and why we're doing the things we're doing. And so yeah, I'd say like there's no like kind of like overall framework that is necessarily being followed here, but there's like a lot of like just like I don't know, like my team is like full of like smart people. And so I think like they have like good heads on their shoulders when it comes to
Hmm.
like, respecting, privacy and like respecting like ethical data science usage.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of what we've talked about is kind of from the personal side, kind of being responsible for yourself and the work that you're doing. So do you have advice for people, especially a lot of our audience are students, who also went to UCSD, so very much in your shoes. Do you have advice for when it comes time to, really take on a full-time career? What are some kind of maybe steps they can take or a mindset to have when it comes to kind of holding themselves accountable? Because like you said, I think it can be easy to take the easy way out, but
Yeah.
then maybe ethics are being put to the side.
hmm I think for starters, like I'm a huge proponent of like I wouldn't say like just having like a class dedicated to these types of things, but like weaving it throughout the curriculum, I think is huge. Like it's one thing if it's just like, you have to take like this data ethics course. I think like me, frankly, if I was like 18 and just joined college, I'd be like, okay, like whatever, like I'll just take the course. And I wouldn't
Mhm.
really think about it much after. But if it's like something that is like properly weaved into the curriculums of like every class you take, and it's like, you know, it is made to be like a part of an exercise similar to just like writing doc strings or test cases for your code, then I think like that would go a long way in kind of just like ensuring that the way you think like goes with like, you're always considering ethics as a priority whenever you're writing code or, making like architecting a model or doing whatever it is you're doing. Like it's always something that'll be taken into account. And so I think like I'm a huge proponent of just like ensuring that that is something that is like constantly kind of reinforced throughout like your learning experience.
I don't know if you've ever literally experienced this or maybe just have thoughts on if someone experienced this. What are steps that you think someone should take if maybe they enter a position where it seems like maybe responsibility isn't necessarily at the forefront,
Mhm.
ethics aren't at the forefront? Do you think there's a way to go about that type of situation?
Sure. I'd say like I think that's like a fairly common thing from what I've heard. I think like I've been lucky enough to not have to like personally encounter that. But in terms of like recommendations, I think like, and I'm probably still guilty of this a bit to my extent because I'd say I'm still like relatively new in my career, but I think like a lot of new people are generally just like afraid to speak up about a lot of things. And so I think it's like something that should come, like it's something that should come up in discussions about these things. Even if you're like brand new to the company and stuff like that, like just bringing it up in conversation goes a long way. I think like with a lot of like regulation and stuff, there's also like the angle, which is like not the angle that I would personally be like the one to take, but like hypothetically there are cases where like, there are these data breaches and stuff like that that are like that'll have actual like bottom line impacts to the business that come from a result of bad ethics and data practices. And so if that's like the angle that needs to be taken with like some of these conversations, I think like so be it. But yeah, I mean like I think like it should just be a matter of like you should be willing to like advocate for your positions. And I think like now like a lot of younger people are starting to be like more vocal about things, which I think is like awesome. So like yeah, just like speak up about these things where you can, and just make sure it's like at the very least something that you incorporate into your own work
Hmm.
as much as you can.
Yeah, that's good advice. I know you mentioned that you have a lot of friends and mentors in the industry. So for people who maybe are newer to the industry, do you have advice for maybe forming those relationships and finding mentors? It sounds like mentorship was definitely or
Yeah.
is an important thing for you. So do you have thoughts on kind of forming those connections?
Yeah, if you're in San Diego, come to DSA events.
Yeah. Didn't pay him to say
Yeah.
that.
But yeah, I mean beyond that, I mean like I think like for me when I was at college, like a big part of it was just like going to things. Like I don't really know how to like put that in a better way. Just like, be active, right? So for
Mhm.
me, like I'll give like my kind of example of like what I did. I don't know if it's necessarily like a one-to-one, like you can replicate this, but like I'm sure similar things exist across the country. But, for me, when I was a freshman, I joined like a few student orgs, primarily the Data Science Student Society at USSD and something called Student Foundation, which is effectively like the link between USSD's faculty, the student body, and the alumni network. And so through these kinds of organizations, just through like attending meetings and like kind of going through like the process with these organizations, you just meet people. Like you'll meet your peers. They'll bring in like alumni to do events, speak. So it's like you meet them through that. You're like potentially going to be planning stuff yourself. So I was, the president of Student Foundation and the professional events director at DS3 at a certain like some point in my college career. And so that had me interfacing with a lot of people who were in industry. And so naturally, I just built a lot of connections that way as well. I wouldn't necessarily say you have to do like those things specifically. This can be like anything. You can, join other clubs, like clubs that you're like interested in. I think just naturally you will just meet people, and like the more people you meet and kind of have like rapport with, like, you're on a first name basis with, like that just goes a long way. I mean, even now it's like outside of people who are like alumni when I was in college, like even just like my peers and stuff like that, like my friends, it's like if I need help like preparing for interviews and stuff like that, like they're there to help you. If you want, like if they're working at a cool company and you want a referral, like I've done that so many times. And it's like, you're just like you have this network of people who are like kind of have similar goals to you, similar aspirations, and like similar ways of like viewing the world. And I think that goes a long way in kind of just like building a strong network and kind of like helping you have like a strong network of knowledge, of like friendship, and of like professional development. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And DSA is a great way.
Yes, that's a great way. Yeah.
Well, like we said, there's so much going on, changing, evolving all the time. Are there any innovations or trends or anything like that that you're feeling especially excited or optimistic about, or just kind of keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so I'm keeping an eye on the like agentic AI space. So I think like it's one that frankly I'd like to be a little more educated on before I start like, yapping about it or whatever. But I think like from a kind of high level, I find it to be super intriguing to see kind of like this wave of like AI that's going to be used in this type of manner of like where they can be used to like do tasks just really well. And so like particularly in the coding space, I think like that's one where it's like if I can improve my, coding output like at a scale, like that can help with, like just getting quicker timelines and like customer turnarounds and stuff like that while still maintaining like that level of privacy that we like aim to kind of keep. And so like in a lot of cases, customers are obviously happier when things get done quicker and there's like less friction between when they choose to purchase something and when they can actually use it. And so on that end, like I'm super excited to see kind of like how that all goes. I think beyond that in terms of innovations, like I don't know. I think like things are just moving in a path where it's like ideally things are just going to keep getting better and better. So naturally, just like the tools that I already use right now, I'm just of the mindset that like as time moves on, they'll get better. And so I'm tracking, that in the sense of like it just my day to day will hopefully get easier. So we'll see.
Updates and things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the little things. Yeah,
Which do seem to come every day, it feels like.
I know. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We're glad to have you back in San Diego for a little bit before you
Yeah.
get back to the Bay. But we really appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll have you back. There's lots to keep track of, so
Nice.
we'll have you back on the podcast. But for now, thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe to our channel, and share it with a friend. And don't forget, the Data Science Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we would really appreciate your support. You can do a donation, become a member, volunteer with us, or attend an event. We have lots going on all the time here in San Diego, California. Even if you don't live here, though, you can still get involved. So go to our website, datasciencealliance.org. Otherwise, we'll see you here next time on The Data Slice.